Territorial health ministers are meeting in Toronto today. Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall is there to share his ideas on how to save healthcare dollars. What is he proposing? Joining me now is Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Hannah.
Now, Nancy Pelosi is coming out against the Keystone Pipeline. She's saying that the Keystone Pipeline will create fewer jobs than supporters of the pipeline are claiming, and that the pipeline won't help make the U.S. more energy independent. Why do you think this is?
Well, the United States has to make their own decision. And by the way, it's important to point out that a number of Democratic leaders that I met with when I was in Washington support Keystone, and they support it because of the jobs. They support it because of the energy security issue. I would just say on those two counts, if I can quickly, that it's the State Department that's weighed in on the employment, around 42,000 construction jobs over 2 years. And on the energy security issue, I think what we're hearing from some of those who are opposed to it is a concern for some reason that the oil, once it gets to Port Arthur in Texas, will be exported to China. Well, that'd be a pretty circuitous route and a slow boat to China, if you will, to do that. Secondly, I think that's dependent, or the principle of what they're saying is really dependent on there being a surplus of supply there. And what we know is that Mexican oil to that same port, Venezuelan oil to that same port is likely to decrease. So it's hard to see how the surplus that would be required for her concerns to be manifest, it's hard to see how that would happen. Still, obviously some in the United States oppose it, some support it. I think the polling shows that 70% plus support the project down south of the 49th, and now it's very much up to the President and the administration to make the final decision. The State Department, remember, has weighed in and said, look, we don't think there's an environmental impact in terms of expanded production of oil in Canada, and I think that has cleared a bit of a hurdle, frankly, for approval to happen, but it's a decision for the U.S. to make. We obviously are hopeful they'll make it in the interests of Canada and the United States, and for us that would be an approval.
What do you think of opposition leader Tom Mulcair's visit to the United States just recently to Washington?
Not much. First of all, I think it's reasonable that a leader of the opposition would go to Washington, would be developing relationships there. Obviously minority leaders in their system play an important part of the system. An opposition leader in our parliament, an opposition party, the official opposition, is a very important part of our governmental system. So it's not the trip or that he would do it, but it's the content of the trip that I'm concerned about, and the many different, seemingly the many different sides of the NDP's position on Keystone. He's saying, well, he supports pipelines west to east. By the way, so do we, and we think it's an all of the above approach. We need to move the oil safely to the south. We need to move it across this country, and we need to add more value here, and we think it's an all of the above question. But if you're opposing Keystone on the environmental basis because it's bitumen, as he seemed to be opposing it when he agreed with the New York Times column, that's one thing. But then to say, no, you don't mind the bitumen moving, we just don't want to move it stateside, I don't understand the consistency of the position, and I think it's a destructive comment to make, and gives license to those who oppose Keystone, and I would argue who oppose it for the wrong reasons, to have their opinion win the day. This is hundreds of millions of dollars in GDP for our country, hundreds of millions in royalties for our country, for Canadians who own this resource and right now are getting much less for their oil when we sell it to the Americans. A pipeline helps deal with these issues. So I think it is in the national interest to have it approved, and I couldn't disagree more with Mr. Mulcair's opposition to this important Canadian project.
Do you think that Mulcair influenced Pelosi's take?
Well, he met with her, and then a day or two later she makes her statements public. I think it gives license to those who oppose, and Nancy Pelosi's voice is a strong one within the party that currently is the governing party with respect to the White House and the executive side of government. So it's a coincidence if it's not directly linked, for sure. So I think that's part of the concern. As you know, our position in Washington was that Canadians need to do a better job of talking about our environmental record. Mr. Mulcair went down to Washington and said that Canadians were trying to make fools of the Americans talking about the environmental record. In Canada, environment is shared jurisdiction. So when he makes that accusation, he's making it of the provinces as well. But I could tell you, when we told the Americans about Saskatchewan investing in the largest clean coal project on earth, that was the truth. We take CO2 seriously. When Alberta was the first province, jurisdiction maybe in North America, to put a price on carbon and develop carbon capture strategies for oil development, that is That's part of our record, and something maybe Mr. Mulcair could be actually defending and explaining to Americans, because I don't think we've done a good enough job. We have more aggressive coal fire regulations in our country than they do in the United States. So I just think that discussion was unhelpful and not entirely true, and certainly not representative of what the provinces are trying to do in terms of renewable energies. We're going to be doubling wind production in our province, for example, or in terms of our environmental policies.
So are you saying he's working against Canadians' interests by doing this?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. In this particular interest with respect to Keystone, but also going down to the United States and basically saying, look, we don't take the environment serious. I get that he's the opposition leader. He may believe that about the federal government, but if you take a look at Canada as a whole, what companies are doing, what provinces are doing, what the feds are doing with respect to coal, again, more aggressive than in the US, it's just simply not true. What he's asserting is not true, and it's unhelpful. Now, we should be saying, as we did when we were in Washington, that Canada needs to do better, that we need to do more in terms of the environment and the energy, making sure energy development is sustainable. But in the same breath, we can point to a positive record. So, and I didn't hear him doing that. And I think, therefore, he was working against the national interests of the country.
Well, Obama has unveiled his blueprint for a clean and secure energy future. It stresses alternative energies and encourages greater energy efficiency. It would cost $2 billion over the next 10 years. Does this move worry you?
Well, it's a decision Americans will make. You know, Canadian provinces are moving towards more renewables as well. As I've indicated, we're in Saskatchewan, we're going to be doubling our wind generation. We do quite a bit of wind now, and we're going to be adding to that capacity. We're investing $1.24 billion in clean coal technology, proving that's not an oxymoron, where we'll capture 90% of the CO2. We'll recycle the water in the capture unit. We'll use the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, so more holes aren't being drilled in the earth. Then we'll store it, as we've been storing CO2 successfully for years now. 40% of the successfully stored CO2 in the world, geologically stored CO2, is stored in southeast Saskatchewan, in Canada. So every country on the face of the earth, including Canada, have been looking at these the same ideas that the president has been talking about in the U.S. It's not an either-or proposition. We need transition energy. We're going to use carbon-based energy for that transition as we seek more sustainable forms of it. We happen to be a leader in terms of those forms of energy. And we're also a leader, frankly, in investing in technology to reduce the CO2 footprint around the use of that transitional energy.
Now, I want to move on to another topic. I want to ask you what came out of today's meeting with health ministers?
Well, more progress. As you know, the premiers of Canada have asked Premier Giz and I to work on a healthcare innovation working group of Canadian health ministers in the provinces and the territories, and we've been doing that. Earlier this year, we delivered on lower cost pharmaceuticals. We've basically bulk priced 6 generic drugs that'll save us $100 million a year as Canadians. Today we've identified that we're going to work on some brand drugs, and we'll report on that specifically to the Council of the Federation, to the other premiers when we meet in Ontario this summer. But we also want to focus on some opportunities around appropriate care. And what we mean by that is using the patient-first model, and ensuring that this is about better care. We can also perhaps find some savings. For example, the radiologists of our country have produced a report that says, 10 to 20% of diagnostic imaging may be unnecessary, may not be about better care. And obviously there's a cost to that. We can look at how we're doing knees and hips and determine if we've found the right, sort of the appropriate model of care. By the way, it won't be politicians. Your viewers will be happy to know it won't be ministers of finance or politicians making the decision. This is not about the fiscal impact of these alone. It'll be informed by providers who are working with the health ministers, working with Robert and I, the CMA, the CNA, HEAL, for example. We're going to listen to them and let doctors inform this process, let providers inform it, so that this is about better care, but coincidentally can bend the cost curve.
Premier Brad Wall, thank you for your time today. I always appreciate it.
Hannah, thank you. Take care.